So hi folks, I'm Bindra. I'm a principal engineer with Microsoft, and today we'll be discussing the topic of unlocking minimum permission footprints. So what are we going to discuss today? First, permission restrictions for IaC deployments. How many of you use either ARM deployments or Bicep or Terraform deployments on Azure or other clouds? So many of you, right? So we look at the type of deployments, like some of them are obvious, like what we discussed, but others like Mr. Ora touched upon some of them. So we'll take a quick look at what other kinds of deployments might be, and then we'll understand why do we need to restrict permissions. And then finally we'll look at, okay, how can you automate, make some of the parts of restricting permissions easier. And then we look at a demo, a few demos with Bicep and some of the others. And then towards the end, we look at some of the best practices when you're using this utility. So, okay, we already discussed ARM, Bicep, Terraform deployments. There are some other deployments as well, which might not be as evident. So you mentioned like policies, right? Azure policies. So using Azure policies, you can actually set a policy that suppose this HCI, a particular HCI cluster does not have a particular agent running on it, then install that agent. So that installation or remediation of the policy actually happens through a ARM template, right? Through a ARM template. So templates are used there as well. Okay, so now we discussed, like many of you use Terraform, Bicep, ARM. So what permissions do you give to the pipeline? Like, is it like a contributor to the subscription or owner, or what permissions do you give?
Do we need to be honest?
Yeah, be honest. I'm being recorded, not you.
During their admin, and then following the principle of minimum least permission required.
Right, but do you follow that principle of yeah, so let's say you follow it, okay. But many people would still, I have seen, like giving contributor to the subscription, even if you just need to create resources in a particular resource group, it will be contributor to a subscription, or sometimes I've even seen worse, like owner as well. So yeah, why restrict permissions? Like as you said, like minimum, the principle of least privilege is to be followed, because if there is a compromise of say your pipelines which are deploying, you limit the blast radius to what permissions you've given to that service principal or managed identity which is running the pipeline. So we all agree on why we need to restrict permissions. And now, how do we find the minimum permissions? So if you're using Terraform or ARM or Bicep, how do you figure out like what are the minimum permissions required?
Keep adding till it works.
Exactly. So that's the problem. Like when we created this utility, you start with something which has like no permissions, and then you run it, and then you get a permission error that this particular client ID does not have access to do read on this particular resource, right? Then you add that. There's another way where like which is not like, which gives you some idea, like you look at the template or look at the Bicep or Terraform and try to figure out permission is. Okay, so yeah, one way is to find the permissions manually, and like I've faced that several, many of the enterprise customers, they will have restrictions of actually like bare minimum permissions for key pipelines, right? So there, how do you find it? Yeah, the manually running part is like how you find it, but it gets frustrating for really large templates, right? Or Terraform deployments, right? So yeah, this is the AZ, the utility which we created. Right now it's under my org. We are in the process of moving it to the Azure org. When we started few months back, since the customer was using for policies using ARM templates, we started with ARM templates, but now for few other customers we wanted Terraform and Bicep. So we've added Bicep support in the last 2 months. So we're going to move it. We're in the process of moving it to the Azure org. But yeah, right now this is yeah.
Can you please start it? Can you? Yes. पैसे नहीं लगते.
Okay.
Free है. Long is free.
Yeah.
Can you open it?
Yeah, so this is the repository. I'll just go through it like.
Sorry, I'm always in dark mode. So when I see white nowadays,
So one of the organizers told me that for the sessions, put everything in white background. You know who that is?
it's me only.
Maybe same. I'm like you only. I use dark mode everywhere.
अरे स्टार दिखा मेरे भाई.
अच्छा अच्छा.
सिर्फ 12 ये तो dirty गजल लोग हैं.
No, it's 18. You refresh it. It's 18.
Oh, is it 18? Wow. Thank you, Augustine, and thank you all of you. अबे यार क्या करेगा मैं? So basically, I'll quickly discuss how this utility works. So most of you are familiar with Azure, right? Yeah. So this is Azure Global Azure Bootcamp, right? Okay. So abhi DevOps wala hai na next. So I thought I'll just check. Okay. So basically, you start like manually. This is replicating what you do manually, right? So you have one service principal called the deployment service principal, which initially has no permissions, or if it has, when the utility starts, it wipes off all the permissions that service principal has. And then there is a second admin service principal. Basically, you start with the deployment service principal trying to deploy the Terraform, ARM, or Bicep. It gets back errors. The key domain logic of this utility, key domain logic of this utility is that it's able to parse the error messages and retrieve the what permission is missing and what is the scope, right? So for storage account, you don't have this permission. Then the admin service principal provides that permission to the deployment service principal, and this goes on again and again. Now you might think this is going to take very long time. So, but for ARM and Bicep, we actually use the what if endpoints, right? So you don't actually create the resources, but you get the permission errors, you pass them, and the good thing about ARM and Bicep is that they return bulk errors. So they'll give you like, I will see one complex template later in the demo. It will return like 30, 40 together. So in around 90 seconds, you get the response for even for complex templates. Terraform is different because Terraform does not have a what if endpoint. You can't just do a Terraform plan because that just gives you read access, right? You can't assume that for every read you need to add write and delete because sometimes you got data sources, right? You don't have resources which only need read. So basically you need to run the ARM template, the Terraform, you need to run the Terraform apply and delete. So it takes as long as your Terraform apply and delete will take. Okay.
How many stars?
We'll see in the end. Okay, so let's start with the demo. So this is actually taking place, I just scripted it out. So before executing, we are starting with the Bicep. I'm setting the environment variables for the subscription ID, tenant ID, the deployment service principals, client ID and client secret, and the object ID, and the Terraform path and the Bicep path. For this, I need only the Bicep path, right? And in the actual az-mpf command, I'm using Bicep. So it has got three options, ARM, Bicep, and Terraform. I'm providing the Bicep file path, and I'm providing the parameters file. Okay?
Can you increase the font?
Yeah, sure. More? Okay. Yeah?
Other video where can you see it in the camera?
Yeah.
Okay. So so when I run it for Bicep now, it will take around 90 seconds. And I've not put it as verbose. When I run the complex template and Terraform, we'll see the verbose outputs. So you can see exactly the steps happening. But let's look at this particular template while this is happening. Yeah. So this is a Bicep file, which is just creating a AKS cluster in a subnet, right? So we can guess. For such templates, you can look at the template and guess, okay, what permissions are needed. We'll just validate that the same permissions are there. Yeah. So I've also put time. So it took about, for this one, it took about 76 seconds. And it's telling you that you need these particular permissions. So right, this is giving you the permissions for this particular template. Now we are going to try a multi-resource complex template. Okay. So I'm going to just start deploying that. This time I'm using ARM. So az-mpf ARM. Okay, I'm giving the template file path and the parameters file path, and then that sed in the end is just to mask the subscription ID, even though that some people don't consider it a secret, I do. So yeah, in the verbose output, when I start the output, that will be masked. Okay, so yeah, this is the verbose output, so it will tell you. So this is executing for ARM, and initially it will start with blank permissions, I mean no permissions for the deployment service principal, and then it will start getting the authorization errors. It will hit the what if endpoint. If you work with the what if endpoint, that is like kind of async, so it might take a few tries before it returns you the error or the success message. Okay, so I'm initializing a custom role. I'm initially that custom role has no permissions. I'm assigning the custom role to the service principal. I'm trying the deployment to the what if endpoint. Yeah, successfully passed the authorization error. So it received the authorization error, it parsed it, it added that particular permission to the custom role, right? And then it will keep trying that around 3-4 times. This cycle is going to repeat. But yeah, I'll show you this. When you see the output, this is like a really, it's got quite a few resources. So imagine manually running it multiple times. And I've also timed it, so it should take about 90 seconds or so. So generally, even for complex template, it generally takes 90 seconds. And
so in this particular template, like how many resources and what kind of resources you are actually?
Yeah, it'll come. So this is on that site. I'm using the templates which I put in the samples on the site, and I let it run, and then we'll go to the template also. But this is creating like a many different resources. Okay, I'll go up because okay, what I did, I gave verbose output this time, and I also gave another flag which is show detailed output. So by default it shows you all the permissions required. So for this one, you will see like I'm creating I'm creating container registry, virtual machines, managed network. Okay, yeah, so multiple resources, and if you give the output -- show detailed output, it will show you that for which resources it's going to create those. So this first resource, for instance, is like a app gateway, then this is a network link, right? So managed identity it is going to create. So in this particular case, it's a large template, so it is giving the entire result, plus you can get optionally, if you give a -- show detailed output, it gives you the detailed output. Okay, so if you quickly look at the template, so this is the ARM template which is there on the site also, right? So yeah, I mean this is going to be manually doing it for such templates, it's you can't do it, it's very difficult, right? So it's a huge template. Finally, I'm not going to run it for the Terraform, but what I'll do is, because that is going to take a long time, so what I've done is I've also like recorded the screen session, right? So I'm just going to speed it up. So this is a earlier recording, right? I've just recorded the screen session using IaC tool. Okay, I think this particular is dead. So for my sessions, I normally keep a backup in case there's a network issue or something. So this is, I ran it last night. So this we already saw, this was the Bicep. The second one, so I'm just speeding it up. The multi-resource template also we saw. So I'm just going to speed up through it. And then finally for Terraform, as I said, you first run the plan, then you run the apply, then you run the delete, and it consolidates the permissions. Okay. Yeah, so then I'm just going to run it for Terraform. So the Terraform also, it's quite similar. Terraform, and then you give the working directory. You have to give the path that's already in the environment variable, the path to your Terraform executable. So you have to give the variable file path and your Terraform folder path, right? I'm again going to do a verbose so that we see the steps in the middle. Okay, so if you look now, it is saying, okay, we are starting with Terraform. It will first start, doing an apply. So it will say in apply phase, so it will try the apply a few times. After the apply is successful, then it will start delete, because to delete also you need the delete permission on the resource. For like ARM, you don't have that, right? Yeah, and it will give you in the same. For this very simple template, it took to just create an ACI. It took around 4 minutes 20 seconds. But still, the idea is you run this in development. You're never going to run it in your production or anywhere, right? So you run it once, and yeah, it's still. So I've done it with where we actually ran it. It was taking about 16 minutes, but still it was giving you information which would have taken you like 2 days if you did it manually. So now we've looked at this.
Like when
Yeah.
you're doing Terraform apply and destroy, that particular step you're still giving full contributor permissions and then figuring.
No.
Okay.
So when the plan starts, right? So it the way it works is it'll try to read all the resources, right? So then in Terraform you don't get bulk errors together. So for one you will start getting that same format of errors. So my parsing logic remains the same, but you get one error at a time. In case of ARM and Bicep, I was getting multiple at a time. Then you keep adding those. Then after the plan and apply are successful, you try the delete, right? The destroy. So yeah, then you get the delete permissions. Okay. So now, we'll go to the site again. Yeah. Okay. The couple of things. Always run this in development, right? Because what permissions does the admin service principal need? So I said there are two service principals. One is the deployment one, which initially has blank, so you don't need to give it any permissions. So what permissions does your other admin service principal need, right? So if you go to the bottom of this document, yeah. So basically you need to create one resource group, which it cleans up later. So you need to give it resource group create, and then you need to give it permissions to create a role definition, because it's creating a custom role, and then assign. So it doesn't need service permissions to create a service principal. So there were feature requests that people were asking us, why can't it create the service principal? But that was too security wise, nobody liked the idea. So that's why we need to pass in that deployment service principal. We don't actually create it, and as a result we just need the role definition creation and the role assignment permissions, these two permissions. Okay, what else? I think that was like the quickest session ever, but yeah, I think that's all I had. Any
more questions? Yes.
Please.
Amol.
3 stars from me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will give more now. So one basic question. So ARM, Biceps and Terraform.
Yeah.
I extensively use Terraform.
Yep.
But what's the key distinction between ARM and Bicep? Because there is a definite plus in like
So
what if it's a biggest plus.
yeah.
Because we also face a lot of problems.
Yeah.
If your environment is pretty huge, and Terraform plan itself take a hell lot of time.
Yeah.
Still it is, compared to what you will do manually, it is still less.
Correct.
But what is the distinction between these?
If I can now, actually, if you have time, I will run the Bicep with a minus verbose. So the first step of when you run it for Bicep is it actually creates the arm from the Bicep. Yeah. So let me.
Also, if you can explain the major distinction between these ARM, Bicep.
So okay.
Bicep and Terraform.
Okay. So ARM template Terraform you've used. So ARM was initially the native way to create resources like IaC deployment mechanism on Azure, right? But for ARM templates, the developer experience, it wasn't as great as Terraform. Like in Terraform, you can split it in different files, right? So Bicep now brings that in. So Bicep actually it actually first generates ARM only, but the developer experience wise, it's much more easier. The tooling, it makes it much more pleasant experience. Yes.
Yeah, there is a higher abstraction of ARM template.
Yeah.
In an ARM template only getting generated.
Correct.
If you see in the meme, right, he picks up the ghost car. And that's a ARM template here. Taking the abstraction is above, you get it's a DSL. It's a DSL language
Yep.
that makes it easier.
Easier.
For you as a developer to create IaC based deployments.
This Bicep is it's like open source or is it like
Open
Microsoft?
source.
Yep, it's open source.
But it's like Microsoft heavily or
Yeah, it's for, right now it's for, I mean, it's for Azure.
It's only for DSL for Azure.
Yeah.
this is for Azure?
I think it's similar to CDK. What it does internally is converts it to cloud formation. Similarly, Microsoft also came with Bicep to ARM templates kind of stuff. And you can have more coding kind of mechanisms, like you can have loops and those sort of things in Bicep, which is not possible in ARM.
Or very difficult in ARM.
Yeah,
It is.
difficult in ARM, I mean.
Yeah.
Also, what if has come recent?
What it is interesting.
So the utility actually created, we created full deployment. Okay, that was a bit quicker actually. This is taking 90 seconds. The full deployment actually took 60 seconds, but it created the resources. It did not actually create all of them. As soon as I got the no authorization error, we trigger the the differ, deletion is started immediately. But people didn't like the idea that if the what if is available, why are you actually creating the deployment? So that's why we moved as default to what if, and we deprecated the.
There are a lot of engineering was done to have what if. Okay, both सारा उधर.
Yep.
कुछ भी करना पड़ा हम लोग को.
Correct. Yeah. Any other questions? Or we're good.
I think we started. I think they're going to use it from tomorrow.
Yeah. So as I said, we are in the process of moving it to the Azure org. Another thing, maybe I'll mention it, which might be useful for others as well. Yeah. So currently in this repository, this is a executable, right? So the steps they show you to download executable from my repo, right? So how do you verify that this does not have any malicious activity? So I was using the Salsa verifier. So basically, this creates a public record that this particular binary was created from this commit on GitHub. So this was like the native way. But when we move it to the Azure org, there are many more stricter signing by Microsoft keys and all. So that's why it's going to take a bit more time to release on the Azure. But yeah, you can use it. And as I said, the verification is through Salsa, which is like the record, the Google record public registry. It creates a record there.
But Amal, if you're using, I think so, Mani and his friends would be really interested in your feedback.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you plan to extend it to Kubernetes RBAC and those sort of things? Because there also you have this RBAC policies that you
No. No.
What
So,
is also available over there.
no.
Might be a-
Sorry. We're not Santa Claus.
We are very selfish. So whatever is we are spending time in, that's what we want to solve first. Maybe if we hit that, then
Are we done?
thank
Okay.
you.